Hello and welcome to this virtual Espresso session. My name's Jamie Smith. I am a solutions architect within Intercede. This is a virtual Espresso, so the idea of these presentations are to give you a more practical look at some of the features within MyID, and to do that in a time limited to the amount of time it takes to drink a nice cup of coffee. So I hope you've got your coffee ready. Today we're going to look at linking MyID roles to LDAP Groups. That's automatically giving a user within MyID a security role based on their group membership within the LDAP. Usual warning, stroke notification that comes in. This is detailed within the administration guide, so if you want to implement this, I suggest strongly that you look through the administration guide, and you can find out everything I'm going to show you in more detail. It's section 4.4. Right, so firstly, I just want to talk about some terminology because there's a little bit of confusion here. MyID has groups, roles and scopes. So I just want to differentiate a MyID group from an LDAP group, and I'll try and make that clear as we move forward. A MyID group is roughly the equivalent of an organisational unit within LDAP. So it's a bucket where we put user accounts. Roles are the security groups within MyID. So a role will let you do, limits what you can do within the system. So you can set up roles, for example, for different user types within the system. So people who can request cards, people can issue cards, validate cards, all that is set up, or credentials, all that is set up via roles within the system. And you can also do things like we'll see in a second, that you can limit a credential profile. So that's actually all the information around a device, be that a virtual smart card, a USB device, a smart card, a mobile, etc. You can put security around that, so only the right people get that device, and that's done by roles as well. A scope within MyID is the administrative boundary, what you can do. A role will give you what workflows you can access within MyID. A scope will define which users you can do that to. So, for example, if I'm a manager, I may be a member of the manager role, which allows me to request cards for people. My scope will be people within my department. So a linked role within this scenario is allowing a security group within MyID, the role, to be based on the Active Directory group membership of a user. So why is that useful? You can use it to set up MyID privileges. So you can say what workflows a user may access depending on their LDAP group. So for example, if somebody is a IT member of staff, you may give them access to audit functionality within MyID. So if they're a IT LDAP user, they can then have higher privileges within MyID itself. But what we're looking at today is constraining a device issuance depending on role. So here, this could be, for example, you're rolling out a new device to particular friendly users within departments, or you may have a flat Active Directory structure. So you want people in your Japan area or your a particular sub-company that you're working with, or a particular department, to be able to be issued with for example, a YubiKey device, but you don't want that to be available to everybody else. So you can't do that through the organizational unit because your security in LDAP is built up on groups. Here you can take that group membership and specify that functionality within MyID. So the way we're going to do it, and I'll just walk you through, we're going to create a MyID role with the same name as the LDAP group. We're going to define that MyID role as linked. So that will tell MyID to look at the LDAP group when we're bringing a new user in. And it will then check for that LDAP group membership. If it's there, it will assign that security role on import. And that will we can then assign those privileges and the security around, for example, a credential profile. So we can then limit that credential profile to be only the particular users we want to have that credential be able to be issued to them. And that credential will then only be able to be issued to people within the right LDAP group. Now, I hope that makes sense. It'll make a lot more sense when I actually run through it. So here we're looking at a LDAP group we've created. This is Alison Andrews, and she's a user, which is domain admin. Gosh, she's a powerful user. So we've given her a UK Senior IT group membership within LDAP. It's just something to be aware of within this. Don't choose names for these LDAP groups, which are the same as the Windows system groups. This is because we do a group membership check with Windows and member of check when we import the user into MyID, and system groups aren't reported within that. Okay. So here, a couple of configuration steps you need to do within MyID. So under operational settings, you need to click this link to LDAP groups. So this enables this functionality, and you need to make that a tick. By default, that will be a cross, and this isn't enabled. So you need to click on that. And then we're going to create the role within MyID. So I'll just show you that. So here, I'm in as a super user. We're going to go in and we're going to go under configuration, and we're going to look at the edit roles workflow. You can do a lot within these roles. So here, for example, you can see the workflows that scrolls down and down and down. You can specify which group has access. But I'm going to click new, and we're going to add a role, and we're going to call that role the same name as the LDAP group. So that's UK Senior IT. Now, derive from, we'll copy all the settings from any previously configured role, but we're going to do that as allow none, because we're not allowed, this particular role is not giving you more access within MyID, it's limiting what devices you can have. And then if we look at that, the UK Senior IT group roles there, we're going to enable that linking to LDAP group functionality. So we're going to click on that, there we go. And the self scope, again, this is only for the individual themselves. It's not for the whole department they're in. It's not a management functionality. And then we're going to save those changes. And it's that simple. You've now linked, you've created the link to the LDAP, and you've enabled the LDAP group to be brought into MyID and the role assigned for that individual. So here we're going to add a person from the directory and just check that's working okay. So here we go, a new action, and it was Alison Andrews. So we're going to, if we're doing it from the LDAP, which is the directory there, we can use the edit person workflow. There we go. And again, this would work if you're using the APIs to bring this user in. I'm just doing it manually. And there we can see she's brought in, and by default, it's given her that UK Senior IT role membership within MyID. Fantastic. There we go. So anybody in the LDAP who has that role assigned will be brought into MyID. So that LDAP group assigned will be brought into MyID and have a MyID security role put in place. How do you use that? We're looking, if this is a super secret UK Senior IT device, which has, for example, certificate templates on there which are only suitable for the, say, privileged users here. We can then go into the Credential Profile workflow. At the end of the Credential Profile, you can actually specify that this particular device, who can receive it, who can issue it, etc. And here we can say that this this Credential Profile will only be received by UK Senior IT role members. It can only be requested by managers, so you have to have the management right to do that. And it can be collected, it can be issued by help desk staff, management staff, and UK Senior IT. So for example, if it's a virtual smart card, they can collect it themselves. So you've got that high level of security around the whole infrastructure here. We're not using validation on this particular Credential Profile, but you can if you like. So it's that simple. You're just having that as part of the standard Credential Profile functionality now, and that's directly linked to the LDAP group. A couple of gotchas. As I've said, don't use the same names as Windows system groups because it doesn't come across and it won't work. Also within MyID, the groups, so that's like the organizational unit where the accounts live within MyID, you can specify within that group which roles are allowed. So you may not want to have, for example, senior IT people in the standard user group. If that has been specified, that group specificity those roles specified by group will take precedent. So even if you've got this link in, you may not see the senior IT, for example, role appearing for that user. And the reason for that could be that you've actually denied that from the group basis. So people who live in their particular group cannot have that role. And that's it. So very, very useful functionality, particularly if you've got new devices to issue to friendlies, for example, or new devices to issue to particular departments within your organisation, or if you have a flat LDAP structure and your LDAP security is based around LDAP groups. This is a great way to map that onto MyID roles. And so there we go. Again, look at the administration guide. At the time of recording, we're on MyID 12.2. Just double check that in case anything new has happened. We put new functionality into MyID all the time. So we may have some nice surprises if you look in that. Thank you very much for listening to me talking about this. Hope your coffee's still warm. I'm going to drink mine now. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.